Lamine Yamal had just turned 17, but he had already made a name for himself as one of the brightest young talents in football. His moves were fluid, his vision sharp, and his composure under pressure unparalleled. Having already played for Barcelona's first team, the world of football had begun to recognize the name of the young prodigy, but for most people, his name was still more of a whisper than a roar. On one crisp spring morning, Yamal was walking through the narrow streets of a small town in Catalonia, far from the bustling city of Barcelona. He had taken a break from the demanding world of professional football, seeking some peace and quiet away from the intense media scrutiny that followed him everywhere. A break to simply be Lamine again, rather than Lamine Yamal, the football wonder. The town was charming, with cobblestone streets, rustic cafes, and small shops tucked away between terracotta buildings. He wasn't expecting much, just a chance to walk around, clear his mind, and maybe grab a coffee. As Yamal strolled down the road, he caught sight of a small football pitch in the distance. It was not the kind of state-of-the-art stadium where professional teams trained, but rather a humble, local ground that had seen better days. A group of young boys were playing football, their laughter echoing across the field. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and for a brief moment, Yamal felt drawn to the simple joy of the game, without the pressure, without the cameras, just pure, unadulterated fun. He approached the field, his hands in the pockets of his hoodie, and watched the match unfold. The boys were clearly having a great time, but it was also evident that they were far from elite players. They played with abandon, not concerned with tactics or technique, but with a raw, heartfelt passion for the game. Yamal smiled to himself. These were the kinds of games he used to play when he was younger, the kind where the result didn't matter as much as the love of the sport. The boys, in their excitement, noticed him standing there. They paused in their game, one of the older ones squinting at him before raising an eyebrow. "Hey, you," the boy called out, waving his hand to get his attention. "You're not from around here, are you?" Yamal smiled and shook his head. "No, just passing through," he replied. The boy, still eyeing him, suddenly grinned. "You look like you know a thing or two about football. Are you any good?" Yamal laughed softly. He had been asked that question countless times before, but there was something about the boy's directness that made it different. "Let's just say I've played a little bit," Yamal replied, his tone light, though he couldn't help but feel amused by the simplicity of the situation. Here he was, in this small town, trying to blend into the background, and yet, the game was calling to him again. "You should join us for a game," the boy suggested enthusiastically. "We're having a local tournament this weekend, and we could use someone like you. We don't really have many good players around here." Yamal's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by the offer. He had never expected to be invited to a local, amateur tournament. He was used to the grand stadiums, the roaring crowds, the high stakes. Yet here he was, being asked to play with a group of kids who had no idea who he was. There was a moment of hesitation. Should he tell them who he was? Would they even care? Would they be embarrassed later when they found out they had invited a professional player to join their scrappy tournament? And then, a thought crossed his mind, maybe it was time for something different. He had been living in the limelight for so long, constantly scrutinized, constantly under pressure to be perfect. This was a chance to enjoy football in its purest form again, just the love of the game. What harm could it do? "You know what," Yamal said, his voice taking on a playful tone, "I'll join you. But you've got to promise me one thing, don't tell anyone who I am. Let's just keep it between us, alright?" The boy looked confused for a moment but then nodded eagerly. "Sure. We'll just think you're some guy looking for a game." With that, Yamal found himself roped into something far different from the games he was used to. Later that week, he showed up at the small, worn-out football pitch where the tournament was to take place. The weather was clear, the sun shining down on the dusty field. As he arrived, he was greeted by the same group of boys, who were now organizing their teams. There were no fancy kits here, just mismatched shirts and shorts, with a couple of them still wearing worn-out sneakers. They hadn't expected him to arrive in anything special, so Yamal dressed in a simple t-shirt and a pair of shorts, blending in with the rest. The boy who had invited him, Alex, grinned when he saw him. "I knew you'd show up." "Ready to have some fun?" he asked, clearly not realizing that the boy in front of him was a professional footballer. Yamal nodded. Let's see what you've got. The game kicked off, and immediately, Yamal could see the difference between this and the intense matches he usually played in. There were no cameras, no scouts, no fans watching in the stands. It was just a group of kids playing because they loved the game. And as Yamal darted around the field, weaving through defenders with ease, he found himself laughing and enjoying the freedom of it all. His skills were, of course, immediately apparent. He could control the ball effortlessly, threading passes with precision and dancing past defenders. The boys, despite being less experienced, were more than willing to embrace his talent, and they played with a passion that made him feel like a kid again. They weren't trying to impress anyone, they were just having fun, like he used to do when he first started playing football. The match ended with Yamal's team coming out victorious, but the score didn't matter to anyone. The players hugged each other, laughing, and celebrating with high-fives and cheers. Yamal couldn't help but smile, feeling a sense of joy and camaraderie that he hadn't felt in a long time. As the game wound down, Alex came up to him, clearly impressed by his play. "You're amazing," he said, his eyes wide with admiration. "Are you sure you're not a professional?" Yamal chuckled. "Let's just say I've been around the block a few times." And with that, he found himself blending back into the crowd, just another player in a local tournament, surrounded by young hopefuls with dreams of their own. Unbeknownst to the rest of the group, the boy they had invited to play was no ordinary player. But for Lamine Yamal, this was a reminder of what football was truly about, a game to be enjoyed, no matter where you were or who was watching. The tournament carried on over the next few days, with Yamal blending in seamlessly with the group of local boys. To them, he was just another player, another teammate who showed up for the love of the game. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Every day after school, the small field buzzed with excitement, filled with the sound of the boys running, shouting, and cheering, all competing in a manner that was completely carefree. It was refreshing for Yamal to be part of something that didn't come with the weight of his professional reputation, something that didn't have the constant pressure of being perfect. But as the tournament progressed, the boys began to notice something different about Yamal. While the rest of them played with enthusiasm, they began to realize that their new teammate played with a level of finesse, a certain composure that was unlike anything they had seen before. He never seemed to panic, always making the right passes, always in the right place at the right time. One evening, after a particularly intense match where Yamal had scored a hat trick, the group sat on the sidelines, exhausted and happy, chatting amongst themselves. "You know," Alex said, his voice full of curiosity, "you play like someone who's been playing at a really high level. You sure you've never played professionally? Or at least in a serious league?" Yamal, who had been quietly sipping on a bottle of water, looked up with a playful smirk. He hadn't really expected them to catch on this quickly, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized it was inevitable. His style of play was just too refined, too polished to go unnoticed for long. He leaned back, giving them a mischievous grin. "Well, let's just say that I've played with some very good players in my time." The boys looked at each other, their faces full of confusion. Some of them exchanged glances, not quite sure what Yamal was getting at. "What does that mean?" one of the boys asked. "Are you some kind of scout or something?" Yamal chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, nothing like that. Let's just say I've played at some big clubs." There was a pause. The group was silent, all of them trying to process what Yamal had just said. None of them could quite put their finger on what he meant. But then, Alex spoke up again, this time with a slightly more serious tone. "Okay, we're getting nowhere here," he said. "Tell us, who are you really?" Yamal paused for a moment, considering his next move. He had enjoyed the anonymity, the lack of expectations, but at the same time, these kids had shown him something rare in the world of football, unbridled joy. They didn't care who he was or what he had accomplished. They simply wanted to play and have fun, and for a moment, that felt like enough. Taking a deep breath, he stood up and dusted off his shorts. "All right, I'll tell you," he said with a grin. "I'm Lamine Yamal. I play for Barcelona." The boys stared at him for a moment, unsure if they had heard correctly. Then, as the realization dawned on them, their eyes widened in shock. "Wait. What?" Alex exclaimed, jumping to his feet.
You're Lamine Yamal? The Barcelona player? The one who's been making headlines all over Europe? Yamal couldn't help but laugh at the stunned reactions.
It felt odd, in a way, to be recognized like this, especially after spending so much time in relative obscurity among them. But he also felt a certain sense of pride. This was a reminder of how far he had come, from those early days when he was just a kid on a dusty field like this one.
You're serious? Another boy asked, his voice full of disbelief. You're really him? I mean, I thought you looked familiar, but... Wow, this is crazy. Yamal nodded, his grin widening. I know it's a bit of a surprise.
I'm just a guy who needed a break from the professional world for a bit. For a few moments, the boys just stared at him in awe. The realization that they had been playing alongside one of the most exciting young players in the world left them speechless. But it didn't take long for the shock to wear off, and soon the group was buzzing with excitement.
Dude, this is insane. Alex said, his face lighting up. We were playing with a pro the whole time, and we didn't even know it. You're a legend, man. Yamal chuckled. Well, I wouldn't say legend. I'm just a guy who loves the game, like you all.
As the days went on, the boys began to treat Yamal differently, not with awe, but with a new sense of respect. They all wanted to know more about his experiences, his journey, and the famous teams he had played for. Yet, despite their curiosity, Yamal never let the conversation turn into something overly serious. He was still one of the group, and the last thing he wanted was to create distance between himself and the boys who had invited him in as just another player. The tournament reached its final match, and Yamal's team was now facing off against the most competitive squad in the league. The atmosphere was electric. The kids were pumped, the tension palpable. For a moment, Yamal almost felt like he was back on the big stage. But unlike the high-pressure games he played for Barcelona, this match felt like something entirely different. It was about fun, about the sheer joy of playing with friends, not about the result. The game was intense, with both teams giving it their all. Yamal found himself fully immersed in the game, moving through the opposing defenders as if they were cones in a training session, sending perfect passes and working with his teammates like a well-oiled machine. Every time he touched the ball, the boys on his team shouted in excitement, "Pass it to Yamal. He's got this." Eventually, the match came to an end, with Yamal's team coming out on top. But for him, the victory didn't matter much. What mattered was the experience, the reminder that football was always about more than just fame and glory. It was about camaraderie, about playing for the love of the game. As the final whistle blew, Alex turned to Yamal, grinning ear to ear. We did it. We won. And we had a pro on our team. This is a story I'll tell forever. Yamal laughed. Yeah, I'll be sure to tell it too, he replied. But I think it's a story for just us. The ones who played for the joy of it. That night, as Yamal left the field, he felt a sense of satisfaction he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it wasn't the fame or the awards that made him love football. Maybe it was moments like these, moments where the game was simply a game again. As he walked off into the evening, the sounds of the local boys celebrating their victory echoing in the distance, Yamal couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had found the true heart of football again. Thank you very much, see you in the next video.